This is Tim O'Brien in Seattle. It's November 11th, 2025. We're going to talk about quantum computing and some of the hype cycle that we've witnessed over the last month. But first, we're going to cover today's news. The lead story is the Linux kernel is looking to, quote, bite the bullet and enable Microsoft C extensions. This story comes to us from Michael Larabelle on a site named Phoronix. The Linux kernel development team is preparing to enable Microsoft C extensions globally for the first time in the kernel's history. According to Michael Larabelle at Phoronix, 2 patches have been queued into the kernel's build system development tree that would enable the FMS extensions compiler argument everywhere when compiling the Linux kernel. This change, which will likely be submitted for Linux 6.19 kernel merge next month, represents a significant shift in policy, and it's one that Linus Torvalds himself has endorsed. These compiler options allow GCC to use non-standard C constructs typically found in Microsoft header files. Now, this is something that's been proposed and rejected multiple times a year, with kernel maintainers deciding that workarounds were, quote, not too awful, and maintainers resisting introducing another compiler flag. But as Rasmus Valemos argued in the patch submission, Linus Torvalds suggested the kernel should just, quote, bite the bullet and enable it once and for all. That way it becomes available whenever a use case turns up without each individual case having to justify it. And as reported by Michael Larabelle from Phoronix, Linus chimed in and doesn't appear to be against the change, which means that we'll likely see Microsoft C extensions enabled in Linux 6.19. For more information, see the links in the show notes. For today's security story, Runk container, escape vulnerabilities patched. So this is from Edward Kovacs of Security Week. Multiple high-severity vulnerabilities have been discovered in Runk, that's R-U-N-C, the open-source container runtime that serves as the default runtime for virtually all Linux container stacks. Docker, Kubernetes, Containerd, and CRI-O. According to Edward Kovacs at Security Week, these flaws are tracked in 3 CVEs, and they could allow attackers to escape container boundaries and gain unauthorized access to the host system. Now, while Kovacs is reporting that these were moderate, rated 4 on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of severity, I checked some of these CVEs directly, and one of them weighs in at an 8.4. So it's a highly critical bug. Alexa Sarai, who helped discover the bugs, explained that the attacks involved tricky manipulations of mount points and symbolic links during container startup. And by exploiting how Runk binds /proc and special files, an attacker could trick Runk into writing to the host's file system, for example to the /proc/sys kernel interfaces. This can lead to full host compromise or denial of service. Essentially, containers can escape their containment. Now, container escapes are one of the most serious security issues you can imagine in a containerized environment because they break that fundamental isolation. If you can get access to the host system, you can basically do anything you want. Denial of service attacks, remote code execution, persistent access. Given the severity and widespread impact, security teams should immediately update everything that's related to containers. Docker, Kubernetes, Containerd, CRI-O, any other system that uses Runk. Don't wait, you should patch it right now. Today's Weird Bucket story comes to us from Ben Goldhaber of Gold Takes. It's a Substack. Unexpected things that are people. Ships, rivers, corporations, and Hindu deities all share something in common. They're legally considered people. According to Ben Goldhaber writing on Substack, ships have long been accorded limited legal person rights, primarily so that they can be impounded and their property seized if they cause damage while docked at a foreign port. Medieval courts arrived at this practical solution because the ship's owner might be 1,000 miles away, so the ship itself becomes the defendant. In the U.S., corporations have been recognized as legal persons since the early 19th century, allowing them to enter into contracts, sue and be sued, and exercise certain constitutional rights. So corporations aren't just made of people, they are people themselves. And Ben Goldhaber writes about how this has shaped modern business law, and it sparked ongoing debates about corporate rights versus responsibilities. But now it's rivers. In 2017, the New Zealand Parliament passed legislation granting the Whanganui River legal personhood with, quote, all the corresponding rights, duties, and liability of a legal person. This act resolved a lawsuit extending back to the 1930s, where the Maori tribe claimed that steamboat industry and mineral extraction were degrading the river, which they view as an ancestor. The New Zealand Parliament granted $80 million for river restoration, $30 million for forward-looking fund, and appointed 2 custodians, one from the government and one from the Maori tribe, to represent the river as a person. The act describes the river as, quote, an indivisible and living whole, comprising the Whanganui River from the mountains to the sea, incorporating all its physical and metaphysical elements. And also in Indian law, Ben Goldhaber writes about how Hindu deities are considered, quote, juristic persons. They can own land, and they can defend their interest in court, a status that stems from the British colonial administrators needing to determine who owned vast temple properties. That's definitely a weird bucket story. For more information, see the link to Ben Goldhaber's analysis on Substack in the show notes. More news from today. A Chinese electric vehicle maker, XPeng, unveiled a humanoid robot that moves so naturally they had to cut it open on stage to prove no one was inside. According to Live Science, the company's Iron Robot demonstrated such lifelike movements at XPeng's AI Day on November 5th that skeptics questioned its authenticity. This prompted a dramatic demonstration of its internal mechanical structure. It's worth noting that Tesla is also working on a humanoid Optimus, and other Chinese companies have robots too. This race appears to be on. For now, the main takeaway is the video, and you can see the link in the show notes. A robot that moves so naturally it fooled people. We're definitely entering into an uncanny valley now with humanoid robots. OpenAI and Anthropic are reportedly in talks with the US government to share their AI models for national security applications. According to Reuters, the discussions involve providing access to their most advanced AI systems to help government agencies with cybersecurity, intelligence analysis, and defense applications, while maintaining strict security protocols. That's the technology news for November 11th, 2025, but I wanted to cover a news story that I keep on hearing about how Google has really made a huge breakthrough in quantum computing. You saw it announced by The Guardian, by Reuters, and Live Science about 2 weeks ago, and I noticed something that was a little concerning. I'm going to talk about how the journalism in this case gets technology a little wrong, and let me explain what's actually happening. So this is going to be a longer coverage of what's not necessarily today's news, but a story that you're hearing a lot about, along with some analysis. So the title of this section is The Quantum Confusion and When Tech Journalism Fails. And the sources for this are the Google Quantum AI blog, Nature. I've looked at a lot of the coverage around the Quantum Echo story that broke in October. And the thing that I noticed is a lot of the journalism, a lot of the reporting tended to conflate things that had been previously announced as new. So Google has this Willow quantum chip, and that's making headlines today, but nothing actually happened with that chip this week or 2 weeks ago. And the reason I bring this up is because people keep on saying, oh, did you read the Google story about how they solved error correction? And they did make some improvements in error correction, but that story is about a year old, maybe 2. The timeline is this. There's a Nature paper about error correction and logical qubits that Google published in February 2023. And that's 3 years old. And that paper describes a novel approach to creating, quote, logical qubits, which are collections of physical qubits, and finding ways to reduce error. So we have a 3-year-old research, and that's repackaged as Willow in December of 2024. Now I want to be clear. Google has made advances in this technology, and they are impressive. I don't want anyone listening to this from Google to think that I'm questioning what they're doing. This is important work. But I think it's also important for us to call out that this is peak quantum hype. I don't blame Google for this. I blame journalism, or the lack of journalism. There are no technology journalists that fully understand quantum computing. And that's maybe too high a bar to expect, because even the people practicing quantum computing, a large percentage of them do not understand how it works either. And it's a good time to bring up a famous Richard Feynman quote. He said, I think I can safely say that no one understands quantum mechanics. And another quote from him, quantum mechanics describes nature as absurd from the point of view of common sense, and yet it fully agrees with experiment. So I hope you can accept nature as she is, absurd. So whenever you read a story about quantum mechanics or you read an announcement about it, what you need to understand is sometimes those announcements are simplifying things, oversimplifying things in a way that makes it difficult for people to understand. So what I'm going to try to do this morning, aside from chiding journalists for not doing a good job covering quantum, is try to add some context and try to explain a couple of the things that make Google's work a little bit different, things that we should be paying attention to. First, I'll describe what's the paradox of quantum computing. Quantum computing has faced this fundamental problem. Adding more qubits typically increases errors because quantum states are incredibly fragile. Willow appears to have cracked this problem. Julian Kelly, Google's director of quantum hardware, they have this concept called logical qubits, which I'll explain later. And they scaled them from 3x to 5x to 7x squares. These are squares of physical qubits, and they're grouped together to form what's called a logical qubit. And every time they increase the size of these qubit arrays, they cut the error rate in half each time. So they achieve exponential error reduction. And that key innovation centers on achieving coherence times that are now approaching 100 microseconds. And that's from last year. And I'm going to do something that no one covering quantum ever does, which is explain what coherence is. Coherence is the amount of time a qubit will maintain its quantum state. And that's critical because quantum operations must complete before decoherence destroys the information. So you couple coherence with a gate speed. And if you have a gate speed in the microsecond to nanosecond range, couple that with the coherence time, and you can calculate how many operations can be done within that coherence window. So when you're talking about a quantum computer, you're really looking at that. You're looking at the coherence time, 100 microseconds, and the gate speed. Those two things together will decide what you can and cannot do with a qubit. So the Willow chip features 105 qubits with an average connectivity of 3.47. So what that means is each qubit is connected to 3.47 other qubits. And they have innovations on tunability and calibration that allow precise control of quantum states. And this is related to how logical qubits are calibrated, how they measure error. And if you read the paper from 2023 in Nature, you'll find more details, and they might confuse you because it's quantum physics. So by its very nature, it's confusing and somewhat overwhelming. But what they do for a logical qubit is they measure error during some initialization or startup phase. And they're able to capture that error rate or that initialization expectation in order to understand if an error had occurred. And really what they're doing, the innovation that you're seeing here is instead of having a physical qubit and being gated by the lifetime of that, they have a collection, a square of qubits that are related, and they call this a logical qubit. The lifetime of a logical qubit is longer than the lifetime of a single physical qubit. The coherence is extended. That's my assumption. But I also want to reiterate, I'm not going to make some joke about Schrödinger's cat and say it's simple. Read the paper. I really would encourage you to read the paper. It's interesting, and you can come to your own conclusions. But it's also important to note that that Willow demonstration, that doesn't demonstrate computational speedup or solving any actual problem. It simply demonstrates that they have their mind around ways in which to solve error correction. But in some reports, I saw that the error rate was modestly improved. Say it was 2.9% versus 3.02%. So it all remains to be seen. What was actually achieved? Where are the source numbers? Where's the proof? I also want to explain, again, what's a logical qubit. So think of sending a message through static. Instead of sending the number 1, you might send it multiple times, like 111. And if noise flips one of those bits to 0, like 101, you can still recover that original by a majority vote. Now, this is a dramatic oversimplification of the Nature paper, but a logical qubit is the quantum version of that. Instead of storing quantum information in one fragile physical qubit with a low coherence, you spread it across many qubits that are interconnected. They're working together. In Google's surface code, they arrange these physical qubits into a square grid like a chessboard. So for their distance-5 code, that's 5x, 25 physical qubits, all working together to encode just one logical qubit. The clever part is that they can detect errors without measuring the data directly, and that would destroy the quantum state. That's Heisenberg's uncertainty principle in action. They use, quote, measure qubits between the data qubits to check parity. They're essentially asking, is something wrong in this neighborhood, without looking at individual quantum states. So when a cosmic ray hits and flips a qubit, the parity changes, alerting the system to fix the error. The breakthrough from 2023, when Google scaled from 3x to 5x grids, errors dropped from 3%, 3.028%, to 2.914%. And so that was a 4% increase in error correction. Now that's modest, but it did prove that adding more qubits could reduce errors if it's done correctly. And again, that's a breakthrough. But imagine a Reuters headline that's like error correction from 3.028% to 2.914%. This is going to change the world. It actually might change the world, but it doesn't have the same impact. And if you watch that video from a year ago, it's impressive. They ran the random circuit sampling tests, and that's literally a benchmark for quantum computers, but it's not a benchmark for any actual practical application. But again, I'm not trying to take away from quantum computing. I think it is an important thing to research. It's making progress. But the random circuit sampling, or the RCS benchmark, is really just there to prove that a quantum computer works. It's not an actual application. So with 105 qubits, that's far from the millions of logical qubits that experts believe are necessary for applications like drug discovery or cryptography. The system still requires cooling to near absolute zero. It makes deployment extremely challenging. And Julian Kelly estimates practical quantum applications remain about 5 years away. For now, the quantum computing race continues, with the gap between laboratory demonstrations and practical quantum computing remaining quite substantial. And it's also crucial to note that the field is littered with, quote, breakthrough announcements every month, every 2 or 3 months. There's another huge announcement, and they seem to proclaim that the world has changed forever. It's almost like the strategy is to introduce another Oppenheimer to the world every 6 months. But I want to talk about the actual story that broke in October 2025, because I think that's what's lost. Whenever you see these stories reported by traditional journalists, you end up getting a lot of hype, a lot of marketing videos. But a month ago, Google did announce that they achieved something different. It was an algorithm that actually does something useful. The quantum echoes algorithm, technically called an out-of-order time correlator, or an OTOC. It runs 13,000 times faster on Willow than on classical computers. But here's the crucial part. Unlike random circuit sampling, this is an algorithm that has a real purpose. And this also aligns with the information that I've heard, at least anecdotally. Molecular structure, battery research, that's the first thing you're going to see quantum computing impact. Quantum echoes works like an incredibly sensitive echolocation system for molecules. It sends a signal through their quantum system, perturbs one qubit, reverses the evolution, and listens for the echo. The quantum interference amplifies the signal, making it incredibly sensitive to molecular structure. They demonstrated that it could measure the structure of molecules with 15 and 28 atoms, and that matches traditional nuclear magnetic resonance, NMR, results, while revealing information NMR can't usually detect. So they actually made an improvement to a real-world use case. And that's why they're calling it a verifiable quantum advantage, not just running faster than classical computers, but producing results that can be independently verified and repeated. So this actually was a breakthrough. The Nature paper on quantum echoes was published on October 22nd, 2025, and it shows that this could eventually enhance drug discovery and materials science. And again, I'm not trying to be a spoilsport here, but it did not exceed nuclear magnetic resonance. It was on par with the results. There were some hints that it could possibly exceed it, but we're not there yet. And again, I don't want to take away from the achievement. This is one of the first applications of a real quantum computer, but we need to understand what's actually being achieved. And again, I actually want to encourage all of you to go read that paper in Nature. It's accessible, and you can draw your own conclusions. But it's not like the discovery of a new moon or the emergence of a new global pandemic. I mean, it's a news story that should be reported. We should be rewarding these companies for doing the research and investment, but we're not there yet. And the reason why we're seeing so much news coverage, so much hyperbolic excitement every time there's an announcement, is because there's a quantum computing arms race. Google's Willow announcement comes amidst a flurry of quantum claims from competitors. IBM unveiled their Quantum System 2 in December 2023 with a 156-qubit Heron processor. and they claim that they'll reach 1 billion operations per quantum circuit by 2033. Microsoft announced their Majorana 1 chip in February 2025, touting topological qubits that promise better stability. And in that announcement, I seem to remember that they also identified a new state of matter. In October 2025, IBM claimed that they could run quantum error correction on a conventional AMD chip 10 times faster than needed. And if you go back to that Willow announcement, they're talking about something that can be done in 5 minutes, where on a classical computer, it would take longer than the age of the known universe. My skepticism runs deep. At CES 2025, NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang, threw cold water on the entire field. He said quantum computers won't be practically useful for 15 to 30 years. Now, since then, he walked that back because he also is investing in quantum computer research. But he's not alone. Many experts believe that we're in a quantum hype cycle where press releases outpace actual progress. Even Japan launched its own homegrown quantum computer in July 2025. India unveiled a 25-qubit system in April. Everyone's claiming breakthroughs every few months, and it suggests that we're watching marketing battles rather than scientific revolutions. Most importantly, does Willow get us closer to breaking RSA encryption, the cryptographic standard protecting everything from credit cards to state secrets? The answer is definitely no. According to recent 2025 research, factoring a 2048-bit RSA key would require a fault-tolerant quantum computer with under 1 million qubits, a significant reduction from earlier estimates of 20 million qubits, but that's more than 160. Here's the reality check. Willow just has 105 physical qubits, and they're not even at the error-corrected logical qubits needed for Shor's algorithm. To put this in perspective, we would need 10,000 times more qubits. And that's a possibility. If you go back to 1968 and you watch that Incredible Machine movie that I reported on 2 days ago, you're going to see computers that were $1 million computers that had 8 kilobytes of RAM. We're at orders of magnitude more RAM than that now. So there can be dramatic increases in technology. But when I see this announcement about quantum echoes, which again, I want to emphasize is amazing, and then I see it tied to a video from a year ago about Willow, which again, I want to emphasize is also amazing, and that's connected to a paper that was written 3 years ago in Nature, it feels like marketing. A lot of the quantum news stories that you're reading in normal technology news outlets are marketing. And almost all the quantum announcements eerily echo a movie that was published by Bell Labs in 1968 called The Incredible Machine. Now, I wrote a blog post about that 2 days ago, and it was a promotional film that showcased elaborate corporate theater about computer technology. In that film, suited executives seriously demonstrated light pens and computer music with dramatic red lighting. Someone with a voice as intimidating as my own narrated the whole thing. And it was about important and as world-changing as anything you could ever imagine. But at Bell Labs, down the hall, in a storage closet, Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie were quietly inventing Unix on a discarded PDP-7. They were doing this against direct orders from management. So when I see the announcements, when I see the technology hype, I wonder, who is the Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie of today? If you go to these companies that are hiring camera crews to bring dramatic lights into their data centers to talk about the future of quantum, what's the project that's in the other room? Where are the people that might be a little less telegenic, working on the revolution that's going to change the world? And again, don't get me wrong, the Willow chip is awesome. The concept of logical qubits is amazing. The quantum echoes algorithm is fantastic. But I still feel like every time you read about quantum computing in normal news, or even technology news, no one's doing a deep dive. No one's actually giving you the numbers. There's another problem in quantum computing that I've noticed, which reminds me of something that happened just this last weekend. Just 3 days ago, we reported how a group of friends accidentally fooled the entire technology industry by uploading fake benchmarks for AMD's non-existent Ryzen 7 9700X3D processor. Within hours, major tech publications were analyzing the leaked performance numbers. Some outlets even invented things, like tech power-up in video cards with a Z. They both claimed it would have like a 120-watt TDP, whatever that is. That's a detail that the hoaxers never mentioned. That same dynamic happens in quantum computing and the reporting around it. 2 weeks ago, when that quantum echoes announcement hit from Google, it was awesome. It was exciting. But it also recycled the Willow video. It recycled the paper from 3 years ago. And I heard a couple echoes myself. People were like, oh, have you heard that Google has solved error correction in quantum? And it's like, no, that's not actually what happened. Google made a slight improvement by using logical qubits. And it is a highly technical and scientific story to report. But a lot of the reporting was, here, click on this. Everything's about to change. I can't decide if that's just journalism trying to get more hits, more ad revenue, or just a function of the fact that this story might be too difficult to really cover. But it's that same echo chamber that allowed a bunch of kids on Reddit to create an AMD processor that didn't exist. It's that same echo chamber. Outlets are copying each other. They're adding their own analysis to fill the gaps. And they're creating this feedback loop where fiction becomes accepted fact. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because this push to just get a story out to cover technology, or this idea that we're just going to employ people to publish technology stories that are essentially parroting whatever announcement press release comes out on a given day, that actually has a real impact on the industry. If you're looking into quantum computing because you're trying to keep track of it, you're trying to prepare for it, the challenge is it is really tough to tell the difference between marketing PR and actual science. So that's my commitment. Over the next couple of months, I'm going to try to cover topics in quantum computing on a technical level. I'm going to try to explain some of the concepts of the new chips that are emerging in ways that can be understood by general technology practitioners. It's something that I need to do for myself, but I also think that it's going to help us understand what it is that's actually being achieved. But it's also just me being frustrated with having to listen to more and more stories where someone with a deep, newsy voice announces that the world is about to change every month because of a new quantum innovation. But again, I also want to reemphasize that some of the things that I'm hearing are very exciting. If you want to learn more about that Willow quantum chip, you can watch the movie from last year on YouTube. There's a link in the show notes. If you want to read the paper that's in Nature from 2023 that talks about the logical qubits on the Sycamore chip, that's on Nature, link in the show notes. And there's also the paper about quantum echoes. Interesting things are happening. It's just important that we have news coverage that helps us put it all into perspective.